Hello, good evening. Thanks everybody for joining us for this Just Culture workshop brought to you this evening by Astral Aviation Consulting on behalf of the UK Civil Aviation Authority. My name is Matt Lane. I'm a UK GA flight examiner and flight instructor. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with Astral, we're an aviation consultancy contracted by the UK CAA to provide you with safety resources through some dedicated GA safety campaigns, and which this workshop is one of those tonight. I'm covering for Chris, who's obviously one of the normal Astral presenters that can't make it this evening, and hope everybody is safe and well, and it's great to see the numbers climbing joining us this night. Chloe is supporting us from Astral with some of the chat boxes and Q&A. If you want to stay in the loop with some of the events and resources, please get signed up to our mailing lists, and you can do this by going to the website with www.astralaviationconsulting.com, which Chloe's just popped in the chat box as the link. So signing you up also gives you access to the replay of this workshop and various associated resources that we'll be talking about and signposting as we go through. But that's enough about me and Astral. I'm delighted to be joined this evening by Dr. Sarah Flaherty, who's a chartered psychologist with 30 years of working in aviation as a human performance specialist. Welcome, Sarah. It's great to see you supporting us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
And also delighted to have support from the CAA, from Chris Mason, who's a flight standards officer from the CAA, and Chris is the nominated Just Culture champion within the GA and RPAS unit, and very relevantly as well, Chris is the co-chairman of the CAA's infringement coordination group. So Chris, thanks ever so much for coming out and supporting us tonight with this as well.
Thank you, Matt.
Last, certainly not least, Ian Seeger. I'm sure many of you know from around the GA industry. Multi-faceted involvement in GA, but obviously Flyer Magazine. You also run a flight training event business, Pilot Careers Live, and a Cessna 182 operator and instructor, as we were discussing earlier. And you've flown extensively throughout UK, Europe, USA, Russia, and Tunisia, but probably not intending to go back to Russia anytime soon, Chris, I'm guessing. So
even if they hadn't invaded Ukraine, it was a one-off experience, and never to be repeated. Good fun. Glad it's over.
Brilliant. Good evening. Thank you, everybody. I'm in West Oxfordshire, and it's a pretty horrible night here as well. So hopefully everybody out there is safe and well, and we can enjoy learning about Just Culture tonight. Over the course of the next hour, we're going to break the workshop down into two sections. In the section one, Sarah's going to cover what a Just Culture is from a kind of academic and contextual point of view as well. Chris is then going to put that into context and the modern day setting with the CAA's Just Culture journey and what the CAA are doing and improving and moving forward on. And then in section three, we're going to move over to Q&A and questions, and Ian's going to lead some of our involvement in that and pose some questions to our experts to get us going there as well. As always, we're going to have some polls as we go through the presentation this evening as well, so please do get involved with those. No right or wrong answers to any of those. It's just to basically get you involved and get your thoughts and impressions out there from us as well. You will see we've got the webinar chat box. Please have any comments as we go through there, and particularly if you want to share any learning or anything that you think might benefit other people, let us know in the chat box, and we'll keep an eye on it as we go through the presentations as well. And if you've got any questions, you should have the Q&A function there on Zoom as well. Please ask them via that function, and we'll endeavour to answer them at the end, or if they're really relevant and there's an appropriate time, we'll try and pick them up as we go. So further ado, let's move on, and I'm going to hand over to Sarah to talk about what a Just Culture is. Sarah, over to you. Thanks.
Well, thank you, and good evening to everybody. Thank you very much, Matt and the team, for inviting me to join in your discussion about Just Culture this evening. As Matt said, I've had the privilege of working in the aviation industry for the last 30 years across nearly all the sectors. And while that doesn't make me an expert in aeronautics in any way, shape or form, it has given me an enormous insight into human behavior. But you don't need to be a psychologist to recognize that people do very strange things. We all can remember stocking up on toilet rolls at the start of the pandemic. And a quick Google search will show you endless ways in which humans find themselves in situations that are often humorous, sometimes dangerous, and from time to time they can be fatal. There are even awards, the Darwin Awards, which are given to people who voluntarily take themselves out of the gene pools through acts of seemingly heroic stupidity. So whether it's strapping rockets about your person or trying to clear a blockage in a wood chipper with your foot, it's easy to look at these people as being strange or stupid. And yet what we know about human behavior is that our actions usually make sense to us at the time, that they are shaped by the environment in which we find ourselves and by the people we're surrounded with. And save for a few, the majority of us don't intend for bad outcomes to occur, but they do. And it's very easy for us to criticize the decisions and the actions of others after an event. As humans, we very much enjoy blaming one another. It's been described as a delicious emotion. And when something goes wrong, particularly in a safety critical world such as aviation, it's very tempting to simply point a finger at the last person that touched it, and to punish them for an action or an outcome that was probably not intended in the first place. So we know that simply punishing people or blaming them doesn't actually ensure that we stop it happening again. And it doesn't really ensure that we understand why it happened in the first place. But it satisfies that human desire to blame people, and it gives us the illusion that we have actually dealt with the problem. We found the bad apple. But if I was to do a poll now, I would ask you, how many of you have actually made a mistake in your life? How many of you have actually broken a rule? And actually, I would say, unless you're slightly delusional or probably lying, everybody out there will have made a mistake at some point. In fact, probably many mistakes today. So does that mean we're all bad apples, or are we just simply human? So, of course, we can swing the pendulum too far and we can say, well, it's human nature. We are bound to make mistakes, therefore it's not our fault. And life should be blame free. Well, actually, that doesn't work either, because that's one step down the road to anarchy. And that's not what we want in our industry. But we know that we need to find a middle ground between the blameless approach and the blaming, finger pointing, punishing everybody for everything approach. And that's where the just culture piece sits. So what is a just culture? Well, the term's been around for quite some time. Within the aviation industry, we first saw it probably in about the 1990s through the work of a psychologist called Professor James Reason. At that time, it was often thought of as a bit of a get out of jail free card, or maybe an excuse for incompetence, or just another soft psychobabble fad. And aviation loves a label, and just culture has become a bit of a label. The problem with labels is that it means that we don't necessarily have a shared understanding of what that label actually means. And we don't really know how to actually make this just culture thing work in the real world. It's a bit of a philosophical argument in a very, very messy world. We've got the regulatory definition, and for those of you who find it more difficult to sleep later this evening, I would point you in the direction of EU Reg 376/2014. And in that regulation, we've really set out to give greater protection for people that report events or near misses. So in the regulations, it's defined as a culture in which frontline operators or other people are not punished for actions, omissions, or decisions taken by them that are commensurate with their experience and training. And that means that if we have trained somebody to do the job well and they make a mistake, but actually it was through no fault of their own, that they should be treated fairly and consistently. But it also goes on to say that gross negligence, willful violations, and destructive acts are not to be tolerated. So there is no place for sabotage. There's no place for suddenly deciding that we are going to flout the rules because we think we know better. But the just culture piece is really there to protect reporting, because if we don't have reporting, we don't have data. And if we don't have data, we're making decisions based on hope and assumptions. And we know that that's not a very good thing for us to do. So the just culture definition also makes a distinction between errors and mistakes that are just a normal part of being a human being, and then those choices that we sometimes make to move outside of the rules and where there is that potential for an adverse outcome. So what is made clear within that definition of the just culture is that you still have to take responsibility for your actions. This is not about saying, I'm a human being, therefore I'm not responsible for anything that's happening. Indeed, it's actually the opposite. But what it does stipulate is that unfair punishment or actions that might actually discourage people from reporting safety-related information have no place in our industry. Now, many organisations will say that they have a just culture. They may have a shiny policy, they may have handbooks, they may have T-shirts, pens, the lot. But often their actions don't actually match their words. And I think that's partly because they don't really understand what it means to have a just culture within their organisation, particularly when things go wrong. It can be hard not to point a finger at an individual when certainly you've got the world's media or press at your door. Armed with their lawyers. And today in the world of social media, it can be all over the internet before the lawyers actually turn up. So the way that people are treated as a result of a near miss or an incident or an accident is going to really impact your relationship with your regulator and with your colleagues. And this works both ways. We need to ensure that we are reinforcing and encouraging the kind of behaviour we want to see more of. One of my favourite quotes is is taken from a document that's put together by the UK Maritime and Coast Guard Agency. And it says that organisations create the behaviours they get, and organisations get the behaviours that they deserve. So the behaviour that we're seeing in our industry, whether from the GA community or the regulator or the wider aviation sector, is a direct reflection of our decisions and our actions, our behaviours. So if we want that to change in the future, we have to be prepared to do something differently. As I said, a just culture is really a philosophical argument in a kind of messy world, but it's one that is worth working towards together. This is not something that the regulator can do to you. This is a partnership approach. So by clearly defining what's acceptable and what's unacceptable behaviour, and by ensuring that people are treated consistently and fairly, no matter what the outcome, we can hope to encourage reporting without fear of inappropriate action. So it helps to build trust, to ensure accountability for our own choices, and to encourage that shared learning. And that in turn is going to help us improve the industry as a whole. So before I hand back to Matt, and given what I've just said about Just Culture, we have a poll. I'm going to see this as a bit of a pop quiz, really. And I'd like you to have a read through some of these statements, and then we're going to make a choice as to which one we think is most the best description for a just culture. So what do you think a just culture is? Is it a culture where an individual is allowed to operate freely without consequences, regardless of any negligence and or willful violations? Is it a culture where an individual is blamed for an occurrence that was not their fault? Could it be a culture where an individual is not punished for their actions, omissions, or decisions if they were commensurate with their experience and training? Or is it a culture that treats individuals with mistrust and seeks to punish at all costs? So I'm just interested to see whether or not you have been listening. So are these the final results? It's good to hear, or good to see rather, that most people have gone for C. So this is going to be the just culture definition we're working with. It's where an individual is not punished for their actions, omissions, or decisions if these were commensurate with their experience and training. The added bit to that is that willful violations, criminal acts, reckless behavior is not something that's going to be tolerated. That's brilliant. So I'm now going to hand back to Matt, and I will be available for any questions you might have later on. Thank you very much.
Brilliant, Sarah. That was absolutely fascinating to listen to. Yeah, it really set the scene brilliantly. Thank you. And it's interesting to think, and we can perhaps talk about this in questions later, of course. You talked quite rightly about organisations and that, but of course in UKGA, we're a community of you know, people, aren't we? We're not actually all employed or working for somebody. So that's something we can perhaps explore in the discussion later. So that'll be an interesting aspect. But I'd like to now hand over to Chris, who's going to talk about how all of this has been taken forward and is going to be taken forward with the CAA. Chris, delighted. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt, and thanks for that nice introduction. And as Matt touched on earlier on, well, good evening, everybody. I'm a flight standards officer in the General Aviation units in the Civil Aviation Authority. Very brief background about me. I first started working in aviation in the mid-1980s. Those of you who remember, I was a product of the government youth training scheme under the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, and I had a secondment in British Airways. And I worked hard, they liked me and gave me a job, and that's where my career in aviation started. I spent 11 years there, then moved into the cargo charter operations with Airfoil, then on to Seated, the telecoms company, before working for a few years in the regional commercial, smaller airline sector before I started work at the Civil Aviation Authority 2 years ago. Really good points there by Sarah in her presentation, and she touched on a really important word there, trust. And when I cast my mind back to where we were, the CAA were, regarding just culture, the authority was viewed upon with suspicion, mistrust, and it was deemed an unapproachable entity. And it was also seen as heavy-handed in some of the post-occurrence investigatory decisions, and that mitigating action and guidance to GA pilots was viewed upon as a punishment instead of a preventative measure to ensure safety was maintained. If we focus on the infringements, which was an area that a year ago when the Just Culture champion role was envisaged, the infringement side was certainly a hot topic. And we understood that some GA pilots wrongly assumed that they would automatically have their license revoked if they infringe, which was and remains not the case. Now, having identified these concerns, the CAA undertook steps with the goal of both resolving these feelings of negativity and instead replacing it with confidence regarding the post-management of post-reported occurrences. And I hope that the CAA as an entity will be viewed upon as more transparent and accountable for its decisions. If we can go to the next slide, please. So what we've done, so So basically recognising where we were, let's say 12 months ago, the GA RPAS units came up with some positive steps to become more open and engaged with the community. And as such, the role of a Just Culture Champion was assigned to me in October last year. Now, what's important about this role is that as the Just Culture Champion, I now ensure that I have greater collaboration with external entities such as CHIRP, as well as being the joint chair of the Infringement Coordination Group, which Matt touched on earlier on. Now that in itself is a very important and positive step, because it consequently means that the ICG, Infringement Coordination Group, now has a GA representative stroke Just Culture Champion at each meeting where the decisions are reached per case. Regarding infringements, moving on, CAP 1404 was revised in August 2021, which reinforced the need for addressing safety-related issues within the Just Culture. And this now ensures that all investigations and decisions by the ICG are conducted fairly and in a timely manner. On the 2nd of May this year, there was the creation of the IRP, the Independent Review Panel, that came into effect. Now, this underlines the CAA's commitment to making informed and careful decisions about the people it regulates. Where there is concern that the CAA has not followed the correct process in coming to a regulatory decision, the IRP affords the individual concerned, for argument's sake, the GA pilot, an opportunity to ask the CAA to undertake a review. Now, from an internal point of view, the Occurrence Reporting Governance Group was also created to oversee whether the CAA in its entirety is observing its legal obligation in respect to the review of occurrence reporting as outlined in Regulation 376/2014. Now, this group has been tasked to examine the various nuances undertaken with the reporting process once an MOR reaches the CAA, and this includes ensuring that the correct level of subject matter expert is assigned to assess each MOR, that the MORs are actioned in the appropriate timescale to address any safety risk, mitigating guidance, action for the pilots is fair and just, and ensure there's adequate feedback, which is something that I have picked on, where I believe that it's an area that that needs to be expanded upon, whereas an individual submits an MOR, but they receive no feedback. So then there is a danger that next time they think, well, I never heard last time, there was no feedback, why should I bother submitting an MOR in the future? So it's something that needs to be addressed. It's also been enhanced communication activities, including the introduction of podcasts. I've been working hard with our GA comms team, and the podcasts are designed to address specific and current safety matters by way of open discussion using both internal and external experts. Now, back in August, we released a podcast that examined the scenarios of flying in cloud, and this was recorded in the wake of the accident in April of the English Channel, where the PA-28 was lost with 2 fatalities on board. And then a further podcast was recently recorded covering the issue of runway incursions, and that still needs a bit more work, but that should be released hopefully sometime later this year, or perhaps early in the new year, but I need to confirm it with our comms team. Now, before we move on to the next section, which I'd like to talk about, I think it's time for another poll, if that's okay. So the question here is, how many of you, I mentioned about CAP 1404 a little while ago, how many of you have read the updated version of CAP 1404? So answer A is, I am aware of CAP 1404 and have read it. B, I'm aware of CAP 1404 but have not read it. Or C, I did not know about CAP 1404. So I'll be interested to see your votes on that one. Okay, now that's interesting. I see that over half of you did not know about CAP 1404. Now I'd be interested to know why that is, whether it's something that hasn't been communicated effectively by the CAA. So it's perhaps something that we can discuss later on in the Q&A or the chat session. But yeah, I'm interested to see that. And I see there's 25% are aware of 1404 but have not read it, and 10% of you have read it and are up to date with it. So, but yeah, certainly interested to see that's quite a high volume of answers, responses to answer C. So moving forward, where does the CAA want to get to? Well, I can break this down into 4 very quick points, actually. We'd like to encourage a greater degree of trust with the GA community, this is the CAA, instead of being viewed upon as an overburdensome regulator. Now, by having the trust of the GA community, it is hoped that this will over time foster a more positive and open attitude and dialogue with the CAA. We also want to encourage the GA community to feel free to openly report and assist with any occurrences without fear of any recrimination. And also we want the GA community to view the CAA as more transparent with the whole occurrence process. And that last one is very, very important. So literally just very briefly, 4 points here where we want to get to. So if we go to the next slide, please, what does this mean for you? So basically this can be broken down into 3 areas: resources and materials, system changes and efficiencies, and of course the reformation of the ICG. Now, to briefly summarize, first of all, we would like the GA community to feel they can openly report an occurrence without fear of punishment. Now, information provided to pilots will be used for safety mitigation purposes and guidance only. And to assist in creating an environment of trust, we've taken steps in improving communications with the GA community on a variety of safety initiatives. So, such as looking at resources and materials, we encourage the GA community to refer to a variety of guidance material which is publicised, including the Skywise communications, the Safety Sense leaflets, and the Airspace and Safety Initiatives website, which is very good from an infringement point of view, as it covers a variety of examples of good practices for GA pilots, including listing squawks, infringement avoidance, pre-flight planning, threat and error management, and also the CAA's approach to just culture and what it means to the GA pilot. Now, we've also created a Just Culture web page for the GA community, which has, along with the aforementioned guidance, has material which have been designed to provide a wealth of information for the GA community in respect to the work the CIA is undertaking regarding just culture. Now, system changes and efficiency. There have been some important changes to the CAA reporting portals and the follow-up and incident data analysis. Now, data from each submitted occurrence report is routinely categorized, and statistics are used to identify safety trends and where necessary implement safety mitigating measures. Now, as I touched on in an earlier slide, to assist with the approach, the CAA created its internal occurrence reporting governance group to ensure there's a standardized approach within the whole of the CAA in respect to legal compliance with Regulation 376. And it is hoped by undertaking these steps that the GA community can be reassured that all reporting safety incidents are treated seriously and the information will be used to improve safety and will not be viewed upon as punishing pilots. And then finally, the reformation of the ICG. And over the past 18 months, the ICG has undergone a variety of improvements. Now, as I touched on earlier, each ICG meeting is run with an expertise from across a variety of domains. And this includes, on each meeting, we have GA pilots and pilots with commercial experience, those with air traffic control experience, we have flight examiners and inspectors, as well as other safety and airspace experts. And what this means by having a core of expertise like that each case reviewed by the ICG is reviewed by a high level of expertise who will reach a fair decision. Again, going back to CAP 1404, this is undergone a review to ensure the decisions reached by the ICG are fair by conforming with the severity level of each infringement. And I say the ICG has 2 joint chairs, with one working within the GA unit and is a Just Culture champion, myself. And also it's worth noting that letters to pilots requesting flight reports post-infringement have also been reworded to be a bit less provocative and instead now demonstrate more of a just culture approach. So instead of the pilot feeling threatened that they may have done something wrong, the letters have been restructured to sort of just make the CAA, the GAU be more approachable and sort of just ask, what happened, why did this happen, and we can sort of come to a decision about what needs to be done moving forwards. So before we go to Q&A, there is another poll, a third poll, which I'd like to share with you, and I'll be interested to see, this is quite an important one actually. If we can go to the next slide, please, Chloe. We have another poll here which says, what is your perception of the CAA's approach to just culture in general aviation over the last year? So basically 3 options here. A, I haven't noticed a change. B, I have noticed a change, it has improved. Or C, I have noticed a change, it has gotten worse. So again, your honesty is paramount here, so I'd appreciate your responses, please. Okay, it's interesting that a vast majority say they haven't noticed the change, and that's interesting, but not making excuses, but I say we've had the Just Culture Champion role just for over a year now, so it's going to be an evolving task, and I don't expect to press a button and everything to be fine overnight, but it's interesting that a change hasn't been noticed there, so that's something that I need to look at in terms of what are we not doing properly, or what needs to be improved, or how can we sort of improve the way we are foreseen as Just Culture advocates. 18% say the most change and it's improved, so nearly 20%, that's quite encouraging, and 4% say it has gotten worse. So again, I'll be interested to understand how it's gotten worse, but thank you anyway for your honesty there. It certainly helps build a picture of what we need to do moving forwards and how we can improve regarding the concept of Just Culture. And with that, that's my part over the time being, but obviously I'll be happy to sort of table some questions and answers later, but I think I hand back to Matt now.
Chris, thank you for the honest and candid approach to telling us about what's gone on and what's going on, and where you're hoping to take things forward. We're getting loads of chat and questions in as well, which is great. Thank you very much. I'm just taking note of those, and we're going to try and pick through those in the Q&A at the end, coming up very shortly. So thank you very much from those as well. So we're into the discussion phase of things now, which I think we're going to try and, like I say, pick through some of these questions and comments that people have been made. But what I'd like to do to start with is I'd like to hand over to Ian to give Ian a chance to kind of lead some of this discussion and pull out some of the key themes and questions that I know you'd like to represent from the GA community. Ian, over to you.
Absolutely. Hello, thank you very much and welcome everybody. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. There's a huge number of questions that are going on, and a huge number of observations. While I pick through those, I have a question that I prepared earlier that I wonder if I can ask Chris about, really. A lot of the talk has been theoretical and about various reorganizations, but from a general aviation pilot's point of view, could you kind of describe what to you, or to the CA, I should say, rather than you personally, a functioning, a healthy and functioning Just Culture system looks like and feels like, and how would that actually operate? If let's say I'm not saying I've ever done this, although I have, landed on the wrong runway somewhere, and I decided, it would be beneficial for people if I reported that. How would that actually work? How do you see it kind of taking place, rather than just sort of CAP document or something?
Absolutely. No, it's a good question, Ian, and thank you for posing it. Certainly, a Just Culture functions between, it's a two-way street between yourself as a GA pilot and me or one of my colleagues as a subject matter expert within the GAU. And it's about us as a regulator understanding what happens, and you as the pilot sort of explaining in detail what occurred, and so we can share and understand from a safety point of view if there's any lessons that can be learned. Now, I can refer to a good example that actually dealt with, it was last year actually. I noticed that at a particular airfield, there was a runway excursion where I contacted the pilot, and the pilot responded with a very open report that they misunderstood the taxiway signage, and as a result they suffered a runway excursion. Now, a letter was sent back to the pilot with a bit of guidance material, and then a few months later I noticed at the same airfield 3 further MORs, and the narratives were pretty much exactly the same. The scenarios were the same, where an aircraft had gone beyond the holding point and had inadvertently taxied onto the runway. And I thought, well, there's clearly something going on there. All these pilots can't be making these mistakes. There's something wrong there. So again, spoke with the pilots. They were very honest and open with what with their reports. And it became clear that the issue wasn't so much with the pilots, but it was actually with the airfield itself. So I then referred it to another department within the CAA, who then contacted the airfield, and indeed the airfield acknowledged that yes, their signage was confusing and it needed to be changed. And as such, what's happened there now is that the signage has changed, and since then, touch wood, there's been no further incidents of that type. So basically, to answer your question in a roundabout way, it's about communication. It's a two-way street, sort of. The pilot viewing the CAA is not the finger pointing, not the judge, jury, and executioner who wants to apportion blame, but the regulator who wants to understand what has happened. And in turn, it's our then duty to find out and see what mitigating action can be taken. I say with the issue that I referred to, we liaise with the airfield, and as a result, hopefully there shouldn't be any issues of that like again, if that sort of helps answer the question.
It sort of helps answer the question. I still don't really know, what do I do? Do I file a chirp? Do I pick up the phone and call the CA and say, help, forgive me, I've sinned, or help me? I mean, what's the process? Is it chirp? Are we waiting to get an MOR, or?
The process, if you realise that you have made a mistake, then you can submit an MOR, which the CAA would then review. It'll be assigned a subject matter expert who will review the case, and they will contact you. They'll write to you saying, okay, we've seen this MOR here, please explain what has happened. And then it'll be reviewed and investigated further if required, or it can be closed without any further action, or maybe with a little bit of guidance. So a lot of it depends on the nature of the incident and what occurred, really. So it's difficult because no two MORs are the same really in that respect. So it just depends on the nature. But yeah, it's about communicating with us as a regulator, not fearing us, basically. And to say it's about us viewing us as transparent, that we will treat you fairly and justly.
Okay, I have two quick follow-up questions that are kind of related. Not so much follow-up, but looking at some of the comments that are appearing here, I'm going to sort of conflate a bunch of them if I can. Yeah. There is clearly some very strong feeling that I'm not a stranger to and understand over the years about stuff that has happened. So my first question to you is, what is the CA doing, or what can the CA do for sorting out stuff that's gone on in the past? And a quick follow-up question for Sarah, actually, and I don't know how easy it is to answer this, but how long does it take to create a well-functioning just culture, and how long does it take to destroy a just culture?
I mean, I can answer that one quite simply. Whatever you are working towards, you have to take it one action, one decision, one conversation at a time, because all it needs is for somebody to feel that they've been treated unfairly, and it can destroy the trust overnight. I think we need to make a distinction between and there's a comment that's come up in the chat box about processes, and then the manner in which those processes are conducted. So if we look at investigations, for example, we can look at those in multiple different ways. Why are we investigating? Is it because we want to find somebody to blame? Is it because we want the data? Is it because we want to make sure it doesn't happen again? And so we need to be very clear on why we are asking for information through MORs and why we may want to do the investigations. We then need to be very clear in how we're actually going to treat people that come forward and give us information. And equally, we need to be clear on what we're going to do if people are not volunteering or in fact are hiding this information, because I'm not sure whether that happens, but certainly within other sectors of the industry, that's something that we really don't want to happen. So yeah, the long answer is, well, that was the long answer. The short answer is you can destroy it overnight. It's not an easy thing, because you're talking about trust, and that's something that is very, very fragile.
And the other thing I'd like to just quickly observe, and be interested in your thoughts on it as well, Sarah, is, and it's sort of reflected some of the questions there as well. I think some of the influential personalities and characters in the system can have a huge and potentially disproportionate effect as well. So, you know, if you've got a chief flying instructor or a big character instructor in a flying club or an examiner, that is maybe, and I'm not just talking about, you know, infringements or anything really, but is just displaying views or behaviors that are not great, I think that can permeate very quickly, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in terms of human behavior, as I said, we will do things that make sense to us, and we will be influenced very significantly by our environment and the people around us. So if somebody is in a position of influence, they are a role model. Now they can either use that position of power and influence to make sure that they are encouraging the behaviors that we want to see in our industry, or they can use it for their own purposes. And you know, we've all seen individuals in organizations who either have created a position where they want to be feared, or they want to feel that they have all the knowledge, or they want to be seen as somebody to whom the rules don't apply. And these people can be very dangerous, particularly when we have younger people coming up in the industry, and we want to be teaching them the right way of doing things.
Brilliant. No, thanks, Sarah. Ian, did you have a second question, or was it a two-parter? I've lost track now.
Oh no, the two part. I guess I could probably phrase my question to Chris slightly clearer, which is to say that in general there are many people in the general aviation community who distrust the CAA, and a lot of that is down to previous perceived or real ICG actions, whichever you want to say. I guess what I'm trying to ask is, what's the CAA going to do to repair that, to repair that consistently, because it's undoubtedly there and it exists.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Ian, and certainly when I was approached to do the Just Culture role last October, the ICG was exactly an area where we identified we need to focus on. There is this feeling within certain elements of the GA community that the ICG is unfair, but I always stand by the statistics of the ICG. Like, for argument's sake, if you look at these stats for this year up until September time, 61% of infringements that were reviewed by the ICG were closed with no further action. And so again, as you can see, that there's over half of them are closed. So it's an interesting one. It's, again, as I touched, it's not going to happen overnight, but it's certainly, I think the creation of the Just Culture champion role is a positive step to sort of try and not maybe it's probably the right thing to say, build some bridges and try and engage better with the community. Just it's small steps, but just let the GA community know that we aren't the enemy. We're here for a reason. We want to ensure that safety is maintained, and sometimes we may need to, in certain circumstances, request that a pilot maybe is issued with some guidance material, or needs to sit an online tested tutorial commensurate with whatever the infringement was. So it's small steps. It's not going to happen overnight, and as we saw by the poll figures there, it's going to be a long process. But yeah, it's just a question of working with the GA community, I think is the best way of doing it. And whether that means sort of having more of these, which I really appreciate Astral affording me the platform to share with, well, we've got 144 participants here. So that's a good start to sort of talk about this and just spread the message. There's a lot of work going on with our GA comms team as well. So again, it's just like spreading the message and trying to sort of say that, listen, you know, we're here to ensure safety, and we shouldn't be, how can I put it, we shouldn't be feared, I think is the best way of doing it. It's the best way of saying it. So yeah, it's but to say it's going to be small steps. It's going to take some time, but I believe we're moving in the right direction to be positive.
Yeah, I'm just going to give you some feedback from what some of the people have said here. Trying to read it as it goes, and I think one of the points is, and it's made here by Dave White, saying the process has been unfair and it needs to be addressed. The Civil Aviation Authority can appear to be in denial about that. And obviously, as Just Culture champion, I don't know how many people the CA employs these days, nor how many people are in the GA unit, GA RPAS unit, I should say. So you know, you have a significantly large and important job, possibly even more important job to do internally as well as externally, and keep that bouncy castle of Just Culture fully inflated and not sagging.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's actually a great analogy, Ian, to be honest with you. Yeah, certainly, as you say, keep the momentum going and keep spreading the word. As I say, it's going to take time. I'd say I'm making a point of talking with the community. Like I have a call tomorrow with one of the lates. I regularly attend church meetings, which I see as an excellent platform to understand what's going on in the community, and also it gives the meetings a CAA face who they can speak to, maybe bounce ideas off or any complaints and so on. So it's just about getting myself visible, really. But I say it's a big job. You're absolutely right. Certainly in terms of the whole GA community, there's I wouldn't want to put a number on how many pilots there are there. So it's a big job. But yeah, we're moving in the right direction, but like I say, it's not going to happen overnight. But I like to think we're moving in the right direction. And with the ICG, again, I stand by what I touched on an earlier slide in terms of being joint chair of the meeting and also participating in regulatory interviews. I believe that the pilot who is sitting on the regulatory interview, that he knows that one of the joint chairs is a Just Culture champion. He perhaps obviously feels a bit more relaxed and he's being treated fairly, that yes, the CIA is taking it seriously. They are taking Just Culture seriously because the Just Culture champion was on the interview with me. So again, I don't want to repeat the thing, but it's small steps, but we're hopefully moving in the right direction.
Yeah, I think I'd probably just observe that it's small steps on an extremely long road,
yes,
possibly an infinite road. So my second question, which I guess I should probably ask you, it's one of the things. What can General Aviation do to help the thing flourish, the Just Culture flourish? But also, I'm going to add to that question is what can the Civil Aviation Authority do to make sure it flourishes and make sure it's really well communicated? I mean, the whole thing about the Just Culture feedback and the success at airway markings, I'm not entirely sure that was made public. And a little while ago, we had a couple of years ago, we had the whole thing where the MOR stuff that used to be published, or the accident occurrences that used to be published, are no longer published. So there's a huge amount to be done. I mean, I think transparency is probably an important part of Just Culture, and I would say that we are perhaps less transparent now than we were in the past.
You're absolutely right. Transparency is key, and I'm pleased that you mentioned the issue I touched on earlier regarding the runway incursion, because we've actually going to be creating what I call occurrence reports, where we will focus on a particular incident, and then there'll be a narrative about what happened, what the background was, the investigation, and then on the other side of the report will be the Just Culture perspective. Now, one has been produced, drafted on that very one I referenced earlier on, and that will be shared with the GA community and will be included on the Just Culture webpage, which literally went online, I think, a couple of weeks ago. So it's in its infancy, so it's going to be small steps, but work is being done there. I've been working very hard with the GA comms team who have been putting some excellent work together themselves, including the web page and the podcast. So certainly from our point of view, we're trying to strive to sort of make ourselves more valuable to the community, that this is what we're doing. Here's a portal for information. This is what you can learn from. This is what we did. And this is what Just Culture means to this particular occurrence. And in return, we request that the GA community sort of recognizes what we're doing, and obviously doesn't fear us, but and when they're requested for information, that they engage with the CAA. I have to be honest, a vast majority of the GA community are very open and engaging. When I've requested information, a vast majority of the pilots have come back and been very open and said, yes, this is what's happened, or I hold my hand up. There's just I think, to touch on what Sarah said earlier on in terms of like human action, there is a vocal minority, if I can describe that, who perhaps tarnish the water, so to speak. And then if they're in positions of influence, then yes, that can sort of upset things.
So there's a specific question here that I thought was kind of interesting, which is how many, as in what percentage of people within the CA or the GA unit, if you like, have attended or received Just Culture training, stroke awareness?
We have an internal Just Culture training course. I couldn't give an exact number. I can find out for you, but obviously I wouldn't be able to do it by this evening. But we do have an internal CA Just Culture course, which is run quite regularly. I've done it, and I know a lot of my colleagues in the GA have done it. So it is there. There is an internal mechanism to learn more about Just Culture.
Okay, so just reverting back to some of the Just Culture thing, and something that's always confused me about Just Culture, about you were talking about mistakes that are commensurate with training and experience. So at some point, if someone infringes, we'll talk about infringements, although it does apply to clearly a much wider range of areas, Just Culture, but as your co-chair of the ICG, it's probably appropriate to talk about infringements. Is it kind of considered by the ICG that if someone has a PPL, that therefore their training and experience is that they shouldn't infringe controlled airspace? And does workload, does the design of controlled airspace, the lack of a service, the confusion in some cases of a service, the provision of 3 types of pressure settings and stuff like that, does that have a mitigating effect, or is that just considered as not a mitigating effect because we should all not do it anyway?
It's all taken into consideration, if I'm honest with you. Certainly, each infringement case is reviewed separately, and certainly no pilot goes out to willfully infringe. Wherever that, well, we'd hope not anyway. So, and each case is the ICG reviews each case and looks at what the pilot did, the situation, whether there was a transponder failure or the wrong pressure setting, and whatever the reason was for the infringement, this gets reviewed by the ICG, and then guidance is then sent to the pilot about in future this is what happened, but in future please refer to this, and we issue them in guidance. As I say, 61% of cases this year have been closed with no further action, but we just offered guidance. Now, if you have a repeat infringer, that's slightly differently. But if someone has infringed in the past 2 years, because we only review back 2 years, and then we review it, I wouldn't say slightly differently is the best way of putting it, but certainly we look at what training they had last time. So if we had a closure letter last time they infringed, then they literally, the pilot has infringed again, and the reasoning behind it is exactly the same. Then we might say, well, okay, maybe there's lapses in your understanding of airspace, so you could perhaps sit the online Chester tutorial, or perhaps if there's issues with their pre-flight planning or their threat and error management as part of the flight, then we'd recommend that we direct them to sit the AIAC. So it depends really on the individual, but yes, certainly all the nuances that relate to an airspace infringement, the ICG sort of considers that and discusses that before it reaches its decision.
And sorry, just one.
Yeah, I'd like to bring Sarah back in a minute, Ian. So yeah,
go for it.
Yeah,
Sarah's getting.
Yeah, so Sarah, one of the things, and it's kind of allied to what we've been talking about here as well, is obviously we've got lots of views and engagement and that, and lots of us, the comments here and that are not necessarily all agreeing, and people have got different opposing views, which actually I think is brilliant. It's really healthy because people are engaged and discussing things and kicking things around and ideas, and they're thinking about it. So that's really great. But often said with presentations like we're doing tonight, and engagements like material going out and things on websites and that, it's the people below the waterline of the iceberg that aren't engaged. And that, how do we get a just culture? How do we get those kind of people involved that are maybe they're just not interested, or don't want to engage, don't have a view on things?
Well, as you said, you don't work for an organization, so you have less of a control perhaps than you would if these people were working for you. But what you do have is a community, and you're going to have to harness the power of that community to decide what are appropriate behaviors for your community to keep you all safe, and what behaviors are going to be deemed to be unacceptable. And you can decide that. You work within a regulated framework, but you can decide as a community how you want to do that. Now, you talked about sometimes there's a vocal minority, or there are individuals who may be perceived as being big and influential. We need to be addressing the issues with those kinds of people, where people have a platform, where people have influence. We need to make sure that they are able to encourage the types of behavior that we want to see. And what we want is that we actually want people to report things freely. Now, I fully appreciate some of the comments coming through that in the past, perhaps the regulator has been less than just, but you know, with the benefit of hindsight, I'm sure we would have all done things very differently, and society moves on. And so the GA community is going to have to move on with the regulator, and it is baby steps, but we need to get the people who are influential out there talking about it and encouraging the right types of behavior, and we need the regulator to stand behind what they're saying in terms of their just culture policy, so that when people are brave enough to put their hands up and explain why things have gone wrong, that is accepted in the spirit of the just culture, which is to find out why it happened in the first place and how we can prevent it happening again.
Brilliant. And a question that was posed quite early on that I'd like to pull on, and this is something I'm quite familiar with from my military service, is the FAIR tool, which is I believe been rolled out through the in the display environment there as well. Ian, is that something? Is the FAIR tool something you've come across at all? Is that something you've seen?
That was mine.
Was it yours?
1,000,001 years ago in its original iteration. I actually had it on the fridge, and I parented my son, who made me take it off the fridge. But yes, it was there really. So the FAIR tool, for people that don't know it, my background is in accident investigation. I did my PhD with the AAIB, and I was also responsible for training a number of different airlines across the world when I used to work for Boeing out in Seattle in investigation techniques, and how you actually find out what has happened. We wanted to move away from pilot error or maintenance error, because that told us nothing about why an incident happened. So I was very keen to make sure that we had a decision-making tool which made people step back from the emotion that they might be experiencing to say, actually, what happened? Did somebody intend to do what they did? And did they intend the outcome? And I think if we can ask those kinds of questions, and we can ask whether or not, if we put a similarly trained, experienced person in the same situation, would they find themselves doing the same kinds of things, then we can have a grown-up conversation about what we might want to change in the system, as opposed to it just being, what can we change in that one individual? So we want to make sure that the system is fit for purpose, rather than targeting individuals, because it's a very long way of doing things.
Brilliant, thanks, Sarah. And Chris, is the FAIR tool used as part of the ICG?
It's not, no, certainly, but it's you're absolutely right. It's used in the display side of things. So when I joined the CA 2 years ago, I actually started in the air display team, and it's a very useful tool. And certainly, again, another example is the way the air display team deals with a just culture, that you may have a stop call at a display. The pilot will initially have his DA removed. There's a quick investigation within normally 2 days. It's reinstated. So again, it's a very fair way of doing it. Literally, it says what it does what it says on the tin. So yeah.
But it's not there to replace an investigation. It's just there to guide a conversation, having collected information. So rather than it being an emotional response to something, it just causes people to ask some extra questions to make sure that what they're putting in place is going to fix the issue in the system. And then if the individual needs extra support afterwards, then it works out what's the most appropriate way of doing that.
Brilliant. And Another a question I'd just like to ask Ian, actually, for discussion. Sorry, I don't.
Not guilty.
It wasn't part of the deal, was it? But we were asking you questions. But Ian, you get out and about a hell of a lot around the world and in Europe and all the rest of it. What's your impressions of Just Culture in other GA environments around Europe and the US compared to what we've been discussing tonight? Have you got any observations on that? I'd be interested.
To be perfectly honest, I think I haven't really come into contact with Just Culture elsewhere other than as a concept. What I would say is that the kind of underlying act in the UK, which is if you infringe. When I first started flying, if there was an occasional infringement, you may have had a chat with an air trafficker, you may have been asked to give someone a call, and that was it, and it was all dealt with. And at some point along the line, it was deemed, whether it was the CA, NATS, or somebody else, I don't know, and I can't remember, that every single MOR had to be MOR'd in order to collect data. And that kind of changed the way things happened. I don't get that impression in France when I'm flying in France. I don't get that impression when I'm flying in the US. You get the impression in the UK, hopefully falsely, but perhaps not, that you're kind of sometimes tiptoeing through a few mousetraps and you really don't want to set any off. Whereas I find personally, when flying in perhaps France, Germany, or the US, it feels very much more like you're flying as part of a large team where you're trying to achieve the same thing, not to catch people out. And that may not be what anybody wants to hear, but that's a personal observation more than anything else.
Yeah, Chris, do you have a final comment on that at all? Because we have to wrap up shortly, unfortunately.
No, Ian raises an interesting point there, because certainly we've seen the occasional case that comes with the DICG where a pilot have actually said in their reports, "Oh, when I fly in France or Germany or whatever, this doesn't happen, and you can literally pretty much fly where you want." But I guess, not having flown in France or Germany, I've got to be honest with you, I can't really answer. But I would have thought I believe the airspace structure isn't as congested as it is in the UK. So in the UK, there has to be some more structure. Now, in terms of tiptoeing around, certainly I think it must be recognised that an ASP, if there is an infringement, they are duty bound to file an MOR for safety purposes, because it is a safety event. It could be a loss of separation, or the aircraft could have infringed an ATZ when there's other traffic in the circuit. So yeah, an ANSP, it is their duty under 376 to file an MOR. Now maybe it's some GA pilots are perhaps getting the wrong message, maybe, that they feel that, oh, we got to tiptoe around and what I can get away with it in continental Europe, I can't in the UK. I can't answer that one, to be honest with you. It's a difficult one to answer, but certainly it's a good point that Ian raises, that certainly you might be able to sort of fly more freely in Europe than you can in the UK, but that's probably because we got a more robust reporting process in the UK in terms of the ANSPs had to submit MORs for every infringement. It's a difficult question to answer accurately, really.
Brilliant. Thanks, everybody. I'm afraid we've come to the end of time. There has been so much engagement and questioning as well. It's been fantastic. Thank you very much. It's been great to hear from our panelists as well. If nothing else, I've learned that when my 3-year-old was having a meltdown about an hour ago, I should have put Sarah's fair tool on our fridge to sort it out. So I've learned that, if nothing else, tonight as well. But
be careful what you wish for.
There has been some great discussion from Ian, Chris, Sarah, and engagement from our participants. Thank you so much as well. Ian, thank you for coming and trying to bravely summarise and represent the views of the GA community. Chris, thank you for putting yourself out there as the face of the CAA. Thank you for coming and taking that step with us.
Thank you for the opportunity to present here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Sarah, thank you for keeping us all on the straight and narrow with our language and terminology and concepts. So it's much appreciated there as well. The final thing I would like to signpost is that there was a lot of comment and questions about airspace and airspace design in the forum as well, which was very interesting. I deliberately didn't pull any of those questions because it is quite a big, detailed, complex subject. And what I'll do is with Chloe and the team, I think we'll perhaps have a discussion and kind of airspace and airspace design, and some people that know about that and have specialisms and knowledge about that might be a good subject for future webinars and discussions, because we didn't have the people that were necessarily specialist in that area with us tonight. So I will take that away and discuss that with the Astral team. But other than that, like I say, I wish everybody a safe journey home from their computer to the living room or wherever you're going tonight. If you're out to walk the dog or go to the pub, take care, because it's still pretty horrible out there. And safe flying, everybody, and thank you for engaging. Look forward to hopefully engaging with more of you in forthcoming webinars. Take care and good evening. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.